right, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining. My name is Jill Freeze with Peter and Sarah. We're here to talk about strategic loss, playing the game. Next slide, please. All right, so when we talk about strategic loss, we are talking about it from the perspective of how it looks from the outside looking in. So when we talk about multiple players in a game situation, we are talking about how this looks to the players who are not taking a strategic loss in this case. So it might look crazy to those players. So when we talk about strategic loss here in the situation we'll be presenting to you, it's crazy like a fox, but it might look crazy, just plain crazy to the other actors who are witnessing what is happening on the game board. Next slide, please. A little bit of background here. Our team, Sarah and myself and two other folks, wrote a white paper in May 2021, which introduced the notion that the US government's international competitive environment is evolving in new and different ways, which illustrates the need to assess and consider unorthodox players and environments to better position the United States to be a more agile and player. The paper uses game metaphors to propose a future in which the US competes, which differs in terms of mindset and operating format, while featuring new players that are viable actors with the power to respond to the US government's long-term strategies and goals. So if we think about this in terms of games that we play, specifically board games, we're moving from a game that's more like Risk or Stratego to a game that's more like Calvin Ball, which is illustrated by this graphic on the right-hand side of the screen here, where we have our three players illustrated. We have Calvin, who's more of the traditional player trying to preserve his national sovereignty. Hobbs, who's our agile player here, using innovation to continue to play the game. And then we have Susie Jerkins down at the bottom, who is our unique player who comes and goes for her own reasons, sometimes just to throw a wrench in things or dump a bucket of water on somebody's head. So in this new future we call the new game, the US government might be faced with a vexing question, which is, how does the US develop a playbook for this new game where not all the players are trying to achieve the same goals along the same timelines? And one method of play in this instance is to use strategic loss to explore those opportunities and options to achieve one's goals. In the situation, we don't have a bipolar win-loss scenario. We have a multipolar situation in which winning might take a back seat, where you're not kicking a goal into the goal to win, but you're actually just trying to move the goalposts further to achieve success. Next slide. So when we talk about strategic loss here, we're defining it as a short-term action that is not apparently in your best interest in order to achieve your long-term goals based on a calculated risk that you are taking. So it's a tool that you may use to play the long game, and it's most advantageous in a shifting game board for making that calculated risk that we just discussed, so that multipolar environment. It's most useful when you have more than two players involved, and it allows those classical players like Calvin to increase their agility, but it also requires that those players have an established attribute of resilience. And the risk involved is controlled based on the calculated choice you're making. Next slide. So the value of this choice that you're making in strategic loss is all about the calculation. It's defined as the ability to think through several upcoming moves and then choosing to take the loss. So it places the player in an advantageous position on the game board to open up the trade space to pursue opportunities that might otherwise be unavailable to you. Actions and outcomes are then made with intent, despite how it might look to the other players on the outside looking in. And taking a loss should make the opposing players expend time, energy, and other resources in response to the action you are taking. Next slide. What strategic loss is not are actions that fall under the category of small or tactical actions, an action categorized as what we call high risk gambling, or something just to pursue that short-term goal. Next slide. So when we developed the game that we call Pathways to Preservation, we used a futures-focused mindset to develop it. So we looked at Brazil and the Amazonian rainforest as an example of where you might see strategic loss having practical applications. So jumping to the future, we looked at 2035, where Brazil might find itself at a crossroads. And the Amazonian rainforest, widely considered to be the lungs of the earth, has been ravaged by climate change as well as industrial farming and ranching practices. Given the current trajectory, Brazil's leadership must make a decision to course correct or risk further damage to their environment, as well as the global implications associated with environmental damage. This could include rising temperatures and rising seas. So Brazil,
oops, sorry.
So Brazil experiencing external political pressure from the international community and lower levels of confidence amongst constituents within country, as well as political pressure from its political rivals, is looking to achieve a specific goal that it has in mind. And that goal is of achieving specific environmental outcomes to improve its global standing over the next 10 years, which may include a seat on the UN Security Council. All of this, by the way, is made up. Can Brazil then find a path forward by taking a calculated risk to reach their desired end state by taking a strategic loss? And that is what we are exploring in the game that we play in Pathways to Preservation. Next slide. And so now to talk about this game, I'm going to have Peter explain how we talk about loss, strategic loss in our game.
Yeah, and so
Peter?
just before we jump into things, I'll just explain up front. So this is a typical pattern that we follow. This is a game with facilitated learning. So what happens is the players will play a little bit. There'll be some facilitated discussion, play a little bit, some facilitated discussion. So you're interleaving that facilitation learning with the gameplay, and there's some good value in doing that. So I guess the first question we might ask is, all right, so why are we using a tabletop game specifically, right? I mean, we could be using a digital game, we might not be using a game at all. And so here's just some of the reasons why we chose to use a tabletop game to achieve this. So first off, just using a game period overall, experiential learning has been shown to be very beneficial in the learning process. So letting people kind of learn by doing, they can learn something from the discussion, they can apply what they're learning directly in the game, they can see kind of the benefits of applying the lessons that they're learning. That really helps the brain kind of incorporate the concept. And experiential learning is just so much better than, plain presentation like what we're doing to you right now.
Mm-hmm.
When we go through the process of designing a game, we always go through the steps of reduction and abstraction. That's just typical game design. But one of the nice side effects of this is it really helps to simplify and frame the material because you're pulling out those critical concepts. You're simplifying it down to just the most critical concepts, the most critical components. And so that process means that we're pulling out a lot of extraneous information and we're really concentrating on what's important for the person to learn here. Of course, games are engaging, for all these different reasons listed here. And when your brain is fully engaged in a topic, you're going to learn better. We do find that we can remove a lot of bias. So a typical strategy that we take with serious games for this sort of facilitated training is taking people out of the environment that they're in currently and moving them to a parallel environment. So instead of saying, okay, imagine in your current world, we're going to do all these things, and people are like, wait, no, it doesn't work that way in the real world. We take them to some parallel environment. That's not what their real day job is, but it's close enough. That allows them to kind of open their minds a little bit and say, okay, well, if I was doing, preservation stuff or whatever, maybe this makes sense. But at the same time, you want to keep it a close parallel so that then they can very easily, map that back, do that mental mapping back to their real world. So the stuff that they're learning in the game, they can map back to their real world, real jobs. Role playing is another great way to just, engage the creative side of the brain and make sure as much of that brain is involved in this learning process as possible. We do find particularly tabletop games are a little bit better than digital games in kind of pulling in a lot of the social factors. People interact a little bit more naturally with each other when they're sitting around a table versus if they're trying to communicate through a computer. And so that's a really one of the benefits of using tabletop specifically for this type of learning. And also another benefit of having the tabletop when people are kind of physically grabbing components and moving them around, it's been shown through other research that they learn the mechanics a lot faster. So instead of taking a lot of time just trying to learn how to play the game, they can learn those mechanics a little bit quicker, and they can use that brain power for learning the material instead. And then a game, again, just in general, provides a safe, controlled environment. And I don't mean just physically safe. I mean, hopefully it's physically safe and nobody's losing a tooth to a bad die roll. But at the same time, it's also kind of like emotionally and a judgmentally safe environment, right? So when you're playing a game, you can feel free to kind of step outside your own moral constraints and do something that you wouldn't in the real world. And that kind of safe environment allows people to explore, try different things out, and really helps in the learning process. So these are the reasons why, using a game, in particular a tabletop game, is such a good fit for this kind of facilitated learning. Now, the way that we set up Pathways to Preservation, we really had two different facilitation roles in mind. So one is the game master. The game master is responsible for teaching all the rules, just making sure the gameplay is happening correctly and the players are moving pieces properly. And also just maintain the pace of the game and make sure everyone's having fun and is involved. The game master is responsible for trying to engage people if they're not immediately engaging. Sometimes people are a little bit shy and standoffish, and the game master wants to kind of help pull them into the game and get them engaged. And then the other role is the learning facilitator. And the learning facilitator is responsible really for making sure that all the learning goals are achieved and that the players are actually learning what we want them to learn. They're going to kind of ask questions, and probe players about the decisions that they make as we're going through and playing the game. At any point in time, they could just really kind of do that, as it feels appropriate. And they're also going to lead the facilitated discussion. So they need to be aware of, okay, at this point in time, when this decision is made, we want to have a discussion about this. Let's take that, 5-minute timeout. We're going to discuss this decision. We're going to discuss, the important kind of learning objective that's mapped to this. And it can all be done by one person with some experience. I wouldn't try it with two people who haven't played through the game and learned it very well. But it really is designed to be done with two separate facilitators. So one of the special challenges that we had, we developed this game during COVID. It was really not possible to get everyone in a room together, even for testing. So for alpha and beta testing, we did everything on Mural. This is just a screenshot of what that Mural board looked like, or part of that Mural board. We basically have 3 human players in the game. And so if you remember, Jillian talked about the traditional players. And so the traditional player, there's one player playing as Brazil, which represents a traditional stakeholder in the game. There are 2 players representing what we refer to as Nayas, which is the Amazonian native population. So they're going to...
It's the new Amazonian economic zone is what we refer to it in the scenario.
Right. And so this is the new kind of country representation that's going to pop up during the course of the early courses of the game. And then for the kind of unique and emergent actors, which is that third type that Jillian talked about, those are represented in curveballs that come out throughout the game. And so these are mostly things that there is one emergent actor that comes in and ends up taking on a primary role depending on which path they follow, but most of them are kind of one-shotters. Somebody who jumps in, a terrorist or something like that, does something once and then they kind of disappear. So up at the top right corner here, this is just kind of some of the game aids that we made for the players. The idea here is this is actually a double-sided sheet, a double-sided game aid. The top part of the game aid is actually a mind map that gives the player a little bit more, a deeper look into kind of the motivations of the character that they have. We decided to use this in the game, not necessarily because we needed to have this deep a look at the characters' motivations for them, but also because this was a tool that's actually used outside the game in facilitation. So we used the mind map for facilitation for them to write down their real world kind of mind map, like what were the decisions that they needed to make, what were the ways that they're thinking and feeling about things. That was a part of the facilitated discussions, and so that we use that same exact tool in the game to try to help again with that mental mapping between the two. The bottom part, or the flip side of that card, is basically the main game aid. Up in the top left corner there, you've got a little bit of information about like what your motivations are, a little tiny bit of background, just to kind of get people going and into the game. At the bottom left there, you have the goals that you have in the game. So these are the metrics that you need to kind of maximize and keep healthy in order to be successful in playing the game. So for Brazil, they needed to make sure that their world opinion was high enough because they wanted to try to get on that council. They need to, at the same time, make sure that their citizens are still happy, because if it gets down to zero happiness, then they're going to oust you from leadership. And then you also needed to make sure that your economy was healthy. It's the same reason. If you get down to zero money, you're in trouble. People are going to think you don't know what you're doing, and you're going to get the boot. So you need to keep citizen opinion high. You need to keep the economy high, and at the same time, you want to try to increase that world opinion as much as possible. And then over on the right side is just basically a reference for each of the tokens that are in play. So they can see, oh yes, the blue cubes represent the world opinion, and what everything else represents. And then the first Nayaz player was the protectionist. And so Nayaz basically is a council of two different players, and they're representing the fact that this would be a council of many different tribes. And so the protectionist is concerned about security and forest health. And then the progressivist is concerned with legitimacy and economy. And so you'll notice that they have, these two are going to have goals that are sometimes in conflict. And so that creates opportunities for the traditional player Brazil to potentially get in and try to create a wedge between their Nayaz counterparts. Because the Nayaz folks are going to have to make decisions collaboratively as they're going through and playing the game. So up in the top left corner here, this is kind of like the game board and all the play components. So each of the players has either a pile of money or the Nayaz security token sitting in front of them, depending upon which thing they were responsible for. And then all the other pieces basically go on this game board. And so that has, the forest health, world opinion, citizen opinion, all those things are kept track of on this game board. Again, we expect the players to move all the pieces themselves, and that helps them in learning the mechanics. So that if forest health suffers, they have to go and pick up the forest pieces and pull them out of the forest. Then on the bottom of the screen, we have the timeline, and these can get a little bit longer than what's here. You can see this one is kind of cut off, so they are limited in how long I can get, but they can be pretty long. So we always start off with a curveball. The curveball deck is created in such a way that you could shuffle it and make it completely randomized. It would still work, but we are looking to create a very specific dynamic, and so we stack the curveball deck. So this is the first curveball that always comes out. If they have not kept their metrics high enough, then the curveball will execute. And usually it's a bad thing. Sometimes it can be a good thing. So here, if the forest health is less than 12, then they're going to have a forest fire, and they're going to take some damage, some further damage to the forest. And so it never starts off at 12. It actually the starting amount is 10. I think this is got the wrong number up there right now. So they always get hit by this forest fire in the beginning. And so they get to kind of feel that pain and be like, okay, this is something that's important. I need to figure out how to deal with it. All right, now Brazil actually is presented with the first choice. And the first choice here actually ends up being a strategic loss decision. So one of the things they can choose to do is cede a large portion of the rainforest to the indigenous population, and that will create that Nayaz government entity. So here you can see at the top of the card, there's this kind of the scenario that they have to make a choice about. There's some hints as to some of the different world mechanics that might be affected depending on the decision that they make. The facilitator has a different version of the card, which doesn't have any imagery on it, but it shows exactly what the impact is depending on the choice they make. And you can also see it has this little purple thought bubble in this one block. And so what this is showing is one of those facilitation points. So if they choose option A, we're gonna have a facilitated discussion. If they choose option B, it's going to go down a different path. If they choose option C, it's going to go down a different path. So we're going to go ahead and say that they chose option A. And so they take one of those feet and they put it right on the A box. So that lets us know that that's the path that they're following. Another curveball comes out. They deal with that. And now it's going to be Nayaz's choice. Same sort of thing here. Naias actually does have a strategic loss option opportunity here in this early choice. This is really where we want the strategic loss opportunities to occur during the game, because they're supposed to be these long-term things. So they should be making those decisions really up front, and then kind of seeing the outcome of what that decision meant throughout the course of the rest of the game. One thing you'll notice here is that that decision is the only one that has metrics associated with it. The other two decisions don't, and that's because those are dead end decisions. And so, we have, I will mention real quickly. So this is just an example of one of those emergent actors, right? We've got this environmental NGO that pops up and does something that you weren't expecting and has an impact. Now, let's say that they did not choose option B. So they didn't choose that strategic loss. You can, again, as I mentioned, these don't have any metrics associated with them. And so what that does is that brings up one of these failure endings. And so this is one of the ways that we control this branching narrative, right? We don't want to have, every single option lead to something, because that's going to create way too much for us to handle in a single game. So we enforce them to follow certain paths by just having these bad endings based off some of the choices that they make. And so if you have a bad ending, the opposite player, the opposite team, either Brazil or Naias, is going to be able to choose to rewind to whatever point they want. Here, the Brazil player decides, okay, I want to rewind all the way back to the very beginning. You'll note that we do leave the curveballs in place. And so this allows the players to have a little bit of prior knowledge the next time they're going through. Oh yeah, I know that curveball is coming up, so we better make sure that our security is high enough. So if we come back here, another thing that they'll run into, we don't want to basically have these timelines be super long and have them rewinding constantly, because we don't want the game to take forever. So we do have this concept of checkpoints. And so when you see a little flag like that on a card, that means it's a checkpoint. When one of those comes out, basically we take up all the cards and we stack them up on the side of the deck, and we say, okay, we're going to start again with a curveball. And so that's how we can control basically how far back you're going to be able to rewind at any point in time. At certain points in the game, there'll be just kind of world events that pop up. And so based off the decisions that you're making, again, these will pop up in between player choices. So here's a world event that pops up, and then you're going to continue, on with Brazil's, or actually Naias' choice after this world event. And then when they actually reach the end of the game, this looks something like this. These are non-failure endings, and so there's 5 endings within the game, 5 possible endings. And so when you reach that, basically it's the end of play, and you're going to be receiving some sort of benefit for the end, depending on how good of an ending you got to. So this is just kind of showing you what that full non-linear branching dialogue looks like from left to right. We start off on this orange node at the very far left. And you can see basically there's Naias has the green boxes represent Naias choices, the orange boxes represent Brazil choices. We have our scenarios, and then the choices are these are either in yellow, or if there's a critical choice, we had done it in purple. That's really just for our own planning purposes when we're planning out the facilitation. Those world events that pop up occasionally, those are these blue boxes that you'll see a few of them throughout. Bad endings, you can see, especially if they follow the top path, they're going to be really kind of constrained until they get back into the 2 main paths, and then the 5 different endings. You can see the checkpoints are kind of spaced out fairly evenly to make sure that they don't have too many choices on the board to rewind if they hit a failure ending. And you can see multiple facilitation. The little purple boxes represent places where we are going to inject facilitation, but they also have the option, the facilitator has the option to just start a discussion at any point during the game, whenever it seems like it would be a good natural fit based off of the discussion that's happening between the players. All right, so at this point, I think we want to take a step back and just ask, okay, how well did this actually work? And so Jillian's going to lead us on this section.
So player experience overall, when we alpha and beta tested it, you can see here from these 2 pieces of feedback that generally speaking, the game was useful to help people understand how strategic loss can be applied in the international relations space, that the topic and content were interesting in thinking through scenarios for local country decisions with geopolitical implications. Also to think more broadly outside of the scenario and how this might apply to other customers. And that also just specific to gameplay, starting out more conciliatory, usually helped, unless, of course, players started off, which we wanted them to, in a more defensive position, and then in which case the play was pretty much tit for tat, which is a lot like IR in general. Next slide. A couple of observations about the game. Players really enjoyed the opportunity to role play. It certainly helped facilitate the learning, not only about the game, how to play the game itself, but also about the broader implications of strategic loss and its role as a tool in the toolkit for geopolitical agility. And the facilitation components, both from the game master and then from the educational facilitator, really helped players maintain that strategic loss mindset. We found that without that additional prompting, players tended to default to more traditional win-loss bipolar strategies. The discussions, the facilitated discussions also helped players think about how that strat loss could be applied to other real world strategies outside of gameplay, like I mentioned before. And thinking through those real world strategies allowed players to really consider how they might use strategic loss with their other customers. The tactile components of the game, the tokens, being able to move those also helped with learning mechanics and game engagement. And I'll let Peter talk about this, but one of the key things about being able to move the tokens was especially being able to preserve where we were in the game after a rollback from a checkpoint. So we would place the tokens actually on the checkpoint. So if we needed to rewind at any point, we knew how many tokens needed to be removed or preserved past after that rewind.
Yeah, and really this bullet is because the players wanted to be able to go back and look at their history. So they didn't want to just, when they hit a checkpoint, they didn't want to just lose everything. They were like, I want to be able to see how did we get here. So they always wanted to save their story, basically, which was great. And so we just had to figure out ways to kind of like basically stack the cards up in such a way that they go back and reference it. But at the same time, table space was challenging. So we had to figure out ways of doing that without having infinite table space.
It was also a good way of helping them with lessons learned. So if they had made a wrong or a bad choice for themselves, they could refer back to what they had done previously to say, maybe I shouldn't do that again. Try something else. Peter, do you want to talk about the mechanics?
Yeah, so well, in general, I mean, this is probably something everyone knows anyways, but teaching mechanics as they appear in game is a little bit better than just trying to tell somebody all the rules up front. So we didn't do that. We did more of kind of that emergent tutorial style where we told them some basics, we let them make a choice, and then when things like, you know, the checkpoints appeared, or, you know, after the first curveball, you know, you have the first choice, or a world event appeared. Anytime these new elements appeared, we just kind of discussed with them, the game facilitator would discuss with them, this is what this means, and kind of add to their knowledge of how the game plays, instead of trying to just dump everything at them at the very beginning.
One of the pieces of feedback we did get was there was a feeling of being constrained by the gameplay. A lot of this had to do with the mechanics of the game themselves. A lot of the things that we found, especially in developing the game, especially since two of us have backgrounds in international relations and political science, is that sometimes the way something would actually work in IR is not the way it would work in a game. And so we also, in some cases, felt limited by the choices we could make in developing the game. And therefore, the players also felt that constraints and wanted to delve further to see what the second and third order effects of their choices might be. And rather than hitting a dead end, they wanted to see if that choice could play out further in space as opposed to just hitting an end state, which was good feedback for us.
And this is really just a limitation in how much time and materials you want to have for a game. You can make those paths explode as much as you want, but it quickly becomes a combinatorial explosion. So, there's always going to be some point where you say, okay, we can't follow this path anymore. We have to dead end it and go back to the real path that we're trying to teach you on. So it's a little bit of a limitation in this style of facilitated game. But I don't necessarily think it's a horrible limitation, but it is a limitation.
Because these cards are very large, when you play the game, table space is a challenge, which is one of the reasons why we ended up stacking things as we moved along, both for reference for the players, but also to save space, depending on how big the table is. The long cards are about this long, and then the curveball cards are probably like a standard deck of cards size, but the choice cards themselves, when you're making that choice, are the ones that take up the most space. The other thing, folks who are not familiar with human-centered design, they found the mind maps, those placemats, to be a bit overwhelming, but also useful in terms of helping to determine what their motivation was. Though on occasion, they would just ask the facilitator, what am I supposed to be doing here? Can you remind me? And then that would help them refocus on what they were supposed to be, what their desired end state or end goal was, so that they could determine what selections to make. And then we've already touched on the last one, but go ahead, Peter.
So here was all of the facilitator card versions of the scenarios told you exactly how much to rewind. So it's basically said, oh, you gained 3 forced health. All right, so then take that away. The curveballs, however, use die rolls, and we had weighted dice that were 1 to 3. More 2s on the green die and more 1s on the red die. So they were very small numbers, but they weren't consistent. And so if you went back, you wouldn't necessarily remember, did we roll a 2 or a 1 on this curveball? And when we were doing the rewind action. And so what we found is it was just if we put the tokens directly on the curveball to show exactly what we rolled, and that made the rewinding much easier.
Yep, exactly.
So I think that's pretty much all we had for you guys today, and we wanted to open it up at this point for questions.
I think we are. We are. Oh, okay. We've just been really quiet. We've been behaving ourselves. Do you guys see the question on the chat?
Yeah, the first one is, how long did it take to create the game? Peter, how long did it take us?
Yeah, I think we spent maybe around 3 months or so. And that's pretty typical. Most of that is really, designing the mechanics of the game don't take that long. Really, the long pole in the tent is usually actually getting that learning content created. So, figuring out what is the exact things we're trying to teach them, and then what's the story narrative elements that are going to allow us to have those discussions. That's always the longest pole in the tent. And so I think we spent 3 plus, maybe a little bit, months in developing the game to its final point with a fairly nice looking print coming out of Game Crafter.
Yep. Yeah, I would say, like, as somebody who's new to the game design space, the learning curve for me was a bit higher. So kudos to Peter for walking our entire team through Game Mechanics 101 so that we knew what we needed to do. So it was a good learning experience for all of us.
I've been trying to find out information about strategic loss. I even Googled it and nothing came up. Can you just talk a little bit about what is strategic loss and what you want people to learn about strategic loss from the game?
Right. So one of the key things, so I think if you Google it, it's not going to come up the way that we have defined it. It's typically defined in business as loss leaders. So if you Google it that way, you'll find it. The way we have couched it from an economic perspective is we talk about it in terms of barriers to entry. So if you look at the landscape currently and the way the US competes, not only for dollars, but also just generally from a competitive perspective. It is a very traditional bipolar, I win, you lose, everybody else go home situation. But the dynamics of that have been changing over time as transnational corporations have state-like powers. You get statefully taxless organizations that are very flexible in their identities and can act as a state or grant benefits that states or countries can also grant. That creates situations where it can be harder for sovereign nations. And when I say sovereign, I mean those with land that have clearly defined territorial boundaries to compete. And so you get these multipolar situations where those barriers to entry, where an organization or a country had a monopoly over others, starts to break down, or those barriers start to soften. And so the competitive landscape becomes a relatively gray area, and therefore taking a strategic loss where you're stepping back from the competition floor in a sense may open up the trade space to further explore your options so that you could achieve your long-term goal, whatever that long-term goal might be. And in this case, that also changes the definition of what winning looks like. And so winning in this case, like I said earlier, may not be a bipolar situation where on a soccer field, I kick a goal and I win a point for my team and the other team does not win a point. It could be that I have moved the goalpost slightly ahead of my competition, and that is more of a success format than a true winning format. Or I have caused my competitors to expend a lot of time, money, and energy trying to keep up with me. And that is considered success as well. So it just changes the environment in which the competition takes place. It also changes definitions of what winning might look like or how winning might be defined. And it also might mean that in some cases you are taking an immediate loss, and that might be financial or political, in order to explore other options available to you to achieve whatever your long-term goal might be.
And just so we can answer the other chat questions. So after action reviews are basically just a discussion that happens at the end of the game. But I'm not a big fan of saving all of that till the end of a game. I mean, it's perfectly fine, and you should have an after action review, but we have those facilitation points throughout the game for a reason, because we want the players thinking and learning and kind of incorporating all of this stuff throughout the game. We don't want to wait till the end of the game and then be like, oh, do you remember what you did, an hour ago? And so in some sense, it's almost like we're constantly having these after action reviews throughout the course of the game. And then the lessons learned, of being applied to real world environments, that happens in the after action review, as well as all these other conversations that are happening throughout the game. So one of the things the facilitator might ask at certain points, they may be like, why did you make this decision? The player will say, I made it because it seemed like this was going to put me, give me an advantage down the road in this way. And then the facilitator can kind of have that conversation about like, do you see how this might actually work for scenario X, which is their real world scenario, assuming that the facilitator knows something about the players before the game has started. Again, that mapping back to the real world, it's something that we're looking by making it with a good game design. The player should be doing that automatically without a lot of prompting, but we also want to prompt them, throughout the course of the game to try to help facilitate that backwards mapping.
Right. And when we came up with this particular example for the game, we also had 4 other scenarios we had developed that also focused on strategic loss. This one was selected because our leadership team saw practical applications with other sponsors in other areas. I believe one of the examples somebody said was, oh, this is a lot like what we might need to do if we ever needed to cede authority of Anwar, for example. To the indigenous populations who live there to control it.
So I've got 2 quick questions for you. Did you guys think about utilizing the tabletop simulator on Steam at all? And were there any other games that inspired you, like maybe Risk Legacy or Terraforming Mars on this?
So I would say no. those 2 games in particular didn't particularly inspire us. We did have another game I presented a couple years back called Mars Agency that was a little bit inspired by terraforming Mars. But this game wasn't inspired by either of those in particular. We're aware of the Steam's tabletop emulator. It's a pretty cool tool. I think there's a couple reasons why we wouldn't use something like that. One, we do have to be. We are a company that has to control our IP, and so it's a little bit easier to do when we're hosting things ourselves. We can create digital games ourselves as well, and we have done that. But really, for this kind of game, I think the tabletop environment works better, assuming you're not in the middle of COVID, right? But the tabletop environment works a little bit better, and even something like the tabletop simulator is still digital, right? You still don't have people sitting around the table together, which is really what you're getting a lot of benefit from. It's cool because they're going to pick up the pieces, they're going to move them, they're going to do all that sort of stuff. So it's a nice tool to kind of emulate that tabletop experience, but I think when we have the opportunity to actually do the tabletop experience, it's better for this sort of application. So any additional thoughts or questions? Thank you, everyone. And it looks like we're right up at 12:15. So I think we're ready to wrap.
Thank you, everybody.
And if anyone has additional follow-up questions, our emails are right here. So feel free to reach out to us. We'd be happy to have further conversations.
Or even play the game.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.